evening, everyone. Welcome. Please stand and join us for the flag salute. Pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, welcome everyone. Nice to see we have our simultaneous translator here, all ready to go. So we'd like to report out on our closed session. Item C2 was student matter pursuant to Education Code Section 48918A, student case number 1617009. I believe we have a motion.
I move that the board approve the voluntary consent of expulsion agreement for student 1617009. The student has been found to have violated Education Code Section 48900A2 and is expelled for the remainder of semester 2 of 2016-17 school year and semester 1 of the 2017-18 school year. The student will have the expulsion suspended for the remainder of semester 2 and the entirety of semester 1 so that the student may attend Carpinteria High School for the remainder of semester 2 of the 2016-17 school year and then semester 1 of the 2017-18 school year. Provided the agreed upon rehabilitation plan is satisfactorily completed, the expulsion will terminate at the end of semester 1 of the 2017-18 school year.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Motion carries. So move on to the approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of February 28th.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, move on to the approval of the agenda and consent agenda.
I move that we approve the agenda and consent agenda.
I actually had just two things that I wanted to ask some questions about. Is that okay?
Okay.
D5 and
you want a
D6
second?
after the discussion.
You want a second?
I second it.
All right, now discussion.
Now discussion. Okay. Can I just pull D5 and D6 for just a few questions? I know we've been hearing a lot about different improvements at the Baylord property. Is there someone who can talk to us about this deck?
Mr. President, if the items are going to be pulled from the
We should
consent, then they would be
put
just
it in
business operation, business
facilities.
non-instructional.
yeah, so would you like to pull it and discuss it then?
I just had some questions, so if that's the proper protocol, then I suppose we should take that route.
Yeah, I don't know if there's anybody here to answer your questions pertinent, but anyhow, we'll pull those D5 and D6 and put them in business operations facilities.
Okay.
All right. So we have a motion, a second, and with the amendment that we're going to pull those two items and put them in business operations facilities. This is a roll call.
Rogelio?
Aye.
Maureen?
Aye.
Michelle?
Aye.
Andy?
Aye.
And I'm aye.
Okay. Let's move on to E, public interest reports, presentations, and I'd like to take a moment and have a moment of silence here in honor of Filberto Hernandez, so everybody just could bow their heads for a moment. Thank you. It's an incredibly difficult time I'm sure for his family and those who were close to him. And I know that our administration has been working around the clock to provide help and assistance and counseling where needed, and just shows what a great community Carpinteria is. So I'm sure that's why we don't have a student representative tonight. So we'll move on to item E2, Administrator in Charge report. Jamie.
Good evening, and you took the words right out of my mouth, Andy. I wanted to take the time tonight to recognize two of our students and their families. On Sunday, Mrs. Paradise, Mrs. Gonzalez, the instructional assistant, and I had the honor of attending the celebration of life for Brooke Ann Talt London. Brooke passed away on January 9th of this year and was a Canalino kindergarten student. The school continues to be in close contact with her parents, Jennifer and Ken London, as we continue to recognize and honor Brooke. I also wanted to talk about Carpinteria High School senior Philly Hernandez, who passed away yesterday. Philly was a bright student and beloved by family, friends, and staff. Tonight, there will be a community-driven candlelight vigil at 7 p.m. at the Carpinteria High School auditorium. Mental health services and counseling support are being offered on an ongoing basis to Carpinteria High School students and staff. I'd like to comment that once again, I am proud to be a member of the staff of Carpinteria Unified School District for its incredibly compassionate and quick response to both tragedies and the similarly generous response of the larger Carpinteria community to support the families and all students in our district. And that's what I'm going to end with tonight.
Thanks, Jamie. Any public comment, Julian?
Yes, we have 4. And the first speaker is Dave Moore.
Take you out here. Try not to get hurt getting here. The recent passage of California Assembly Bill 2246 was a welcome legislative leg up for mental health efforts, both locally and statewide. It requires that public middle schools and high schools in California develop suicide prevention, intervention, and follow-up policy before the beginning of the 2017-2018 school year. Policymakers hope this bill will save lives. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among 10 to 24-year-olds. It's been suggested that the California Behavioral Health Directors Association and the Association of California School Administrators will likely be stakeholders in the development of curriculum, making them an excellent primary resource for constructing meaningful mental health programs. This legislation clearly recognizes a proliferation of alarming current mental health issues. Researchers have noted that social media use and cyberbullying are much more prevalent among girls, which could make them more vulnerable to depression. Complicating matters, the number of teens being treated for the disorder remains unchanged, which would suggest that many young people are suffering in silence, increasing their risk for suicide. That's NBCnews.com. For the first time, middle school students are as likely to die from suicide as they are from traffic accidents, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. These trends underscore the significance of a proactive approach to mental health as opposed to reactive strategies, which are always way too little, way too late. It's important to remember that homelessness and mental health issues have continued to be part of the fabric of CUSD's operation. Students, families of students, and CUSD employees and their families have all been affected by these problems. The Boston Public Schools, in a decidedly proactive approach, have concluded that mental health screening should be added to their decades-old vision and hearing checkups. Twice a year, students are evaluated on social, emotional, and behavioral functioning. Those in need receive counseling, psychological attention, and referrals for outside care as needed. These proactive, preventative strategies would certainly be worth adopting in Carpinteria as well. I wanted to finish almost by thanking the CUSD Safety Committee for investing their time and energy in focusing on the mental health needs of CUSD's students. The committee's pivotal first steps in this process are much appreciated and will, without question, be endorsed community-wide as soon as they're approved by the board, sooner rather than later, hopefully. I'm confident that the board has dedicated itself to the notion that none of Carpinteria's sons and daughters should be less comfortable with themselves and their prospects than they'd allow their own sons and daughters to be. To my way of thinking, anything less than this level of commitment is unacceptable. Thanks.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Danielle Hartman.
Hi, my name is Danielle Hartman. I have a son who is 6 years old and going to Carpinteria Family School, and I have a 3-year-old who is eagerly awaiting to go to Carpinteria Family School. So I will be speaking about the sibling ruling that I don't know if it's ruled in or out or what's happening, but I would like to speak about it. So we were so excited when Caleb got into family school because for many reasons. One is our philosophy, how we saw our education for our kids parallels that of family school. We're equally excited because Canaan would be getting into, and they would both be going to the same school. And we were also excited for the community because the community was offering multiple different ways for our kids to learn in different types of classroom settings. And so the relationship began. Every morning, Caleb puts his backpack on to go to kindergarten. Canaan, my 3-year-old, puts his backpack on to go to his kindergarten. And he meets Miss Porter every morning, and in his eyes, Miss Porter is already his teacher. And they've already established a relationship, and there is already something really special happening there, to the point where Canaan wants to come home and do homework, just like his brother Caleb, because he's so excited. On Family Fridays, they have something for 45 minutes where the families are all welcome into the classrooms. And of course we go, and Canaan sits in the classroom, destroys Miss Porter's classroom because he's 3, but now he's also established a relationship with Jan and Laura Lee. And there's no delineation between students and non-students. In the family school process, we're all kind of a student of that whole school. And they have opened up Canaan with open arms. And the reason why Canaan is so open with this relationship is because when Caleb started that school, it was promised to us that there was a sibling law and that my younger son would also be able to go. And now I've heard that might be taken away. And I don't understand why it would be taken away, why the board would want to break up families, why the board would want to at one point say, Canaan, you can go to school, the same school just like your brother, have the same alma mater, and do the same programs, and then at another point say, no, now you can't. And we're going to break up that relationship that was already established. So I'm asking, at the very least, if you don't accept the sibling rule, if you can at least allow the kids that are currently going, that their siblings can be let in, because that relationship has already started, and they are also excited to follow in the footsteps of their big brothers and sisters, and how important it is for our community to keep our families united and to keep a oneness in our families. Because if there isn't a oneness in our families, how are we going to ground our kids psychologically, emotionally, and scholastically to better serve our community? Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Aaliyah Glasgow.
Hello.
Sarah.
I'll reintroduce myself. I'm Aaliyah Glasgow, and I have 2 kids that have gone. Chase has finished family school, and Peyton is in the 4th grade at family school. And so, of course, my 3rd daughter, Bryce, has eagerly been looking forward to going to family school as well. Danielle touched on many of the points that I had. I sent you all an email last night that had more of my opinions in it, and also cited some research that supports sibling preference policies. I think basically the only other things I want to stress is that the Title I first, that sounds like it has been agreed upon. However, I don't know if it was a discussion or a vote, so I would love some clarity on that. But it's kind of lumped into an inter-district transfer board policy. And I feel like DLI, TK, and family school are not inter-district transfers. I feel like they are programs and schools of choice, and I urge the board to reconsider having a sibling policy lumped into a transfer policy. I do think all of those programs should be considered separately. And I just wanted to see if you had any more questions after anything else, if there's anything I can answer for you about why parents are feeling this way about the sibling policy. So you have my email address, and I'm available if you need me. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Casey Gritt.
Hi there. My name is Casey Gritt. I want to start by saying thank you for your commitment and dedication to our district and our children. I have 2 boys at family school. One's in kindergarten, one's in 1st grade. We chose family school because it was the best fit for our children. In particular, my older son, he's somebody that many people may say is slow to warm. So having him with the same teacher for 2 years and with the same cohort throughout his elementary career was a big draw for us. And this has proven to be a huge asset. In our parent-teacher conference yesterday, Ms. Porter informed us that he was speaking up more, he was becoming a leader, and really finding his place. And he's in first grade. So the continuity and the familiarity has been really important for him. If my other son, who is now in kindergarten, was not allowed the same opportunity, I would have been devastated. Lost my place here. Okay, there we go. As Danielle said, before he was officially a part of Family School, he was already a part of Family School. The same thing, attending Family Friday, knowing that Miss Porter was going to be his teacher when he got to kindergarten. He was so excited. He knew she was going to be his teacher when this big day came. So splitting up families is just wrong. I recall back to last year when the DLI program was being voted for. This is for the first time. And there was some concern by some board members about splitting up families. For example, if a family's homeschool was Aliso and the DLI program was only offered on the Catalino campus, this would then split up families because the older students who were still at Aliso, it would be families would have to travel from school to school. So I know that from this, that splitting up families was at one point a concern for board members. With this new policy, it makes it possible that some families may have children spread throughout the district. Even though technically some siblings could be on the same campus, others may not be. What about families whose home school is Aliso or Summerland? This is really splitting up families. Having students at Family School and a student at Summerland, it just doesn't make sense. Family School is being forced to pay the price for the district's failure to comply with No Child Left Behind. The district is trying to right a wrong, and we are paying for it. And this is not right or fair. Family School wants to grow. We want to be able to accommodate more students, but it doesn't seem that we are allowed to do so. Families being split apart and divided is not the answer. It goes what Family School is about, creating a family-feeling environment. To be honest, this to me feels like an effort to dissolve Family School and make us go away. And with that, having schools of choice is an asset to the district. It makes the district more desirable, therefore raising property values, which in turn supports higher funding in the district. I ask that you reconsider this decision. Siblings should have priority, families should not be divided, and we should not have to pay the price for the district's mistake. Thank you.
That's it.
Thanks. All right, we'll move on to E4, the Safety Committee update, and we have Mr. Gloger here. Tell us what's happening.
Oops, sorry about that. All right. Julian, did we have any extra PowerPoints, the hard copies? Can I grab those from you? If there are. That's it. Awesome. Thank you. Sure, I'll take it. Get closer to that. Folks in the crowd here. Nobody else is here.
Applications close next week, right?
I'll take it.
The applications for
All right.
20?
20, yeah.
I don't know.
Closer.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, board members. Thank you, district administration and community members for being here and for all of your support for safety in Carpenter Unified School District. I am Barnaby Gloger, and I am, among other things, the safety officer for the school district. And in my almost 2 years now in that role, I have worked with a number of you and others specifically members of our CUSD Safety Committee, in improving our district's safety preparedness efforts that benefit our students, our staff, and our community stakeholders. I'd also like to acknowledge the many teachers, custodians, instructional aides, and then our community partners like Dave Moore here from HopeNet that have volunteered their time and their energy in our district safety committee and at our site safety committees. We have accomplished a lot in this almost 2 years, and we have worked on a wide variety of initiatives, and we still have a lot of work to do. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about today regarding one of the initiatives, or actually two of the initiatives we're working on, and give you an update. But before I do that, I just want to give a little bit background to those that are new to the conversation of why we are doing this. So we have to. It is the law. It is a requirement. Our Department of Education requires that our school boards provide a safe place for students. Our California Code of Regulations that helps govern our employees requires that we provide a safety forum and communication to all of our employees regarding safety issues. And also the ability for employees to ask questions or bring up safety concerns. And our safety committee is one avenue in which they can do that. Okay. Our school board policy says that our students and staff have the right to a safe and secure campus. Our LCAP talks about our safety and security procedures. And even our Measure U commitments and goals discuss security and safety. So that's why we do what we do. That's why we have a committee. And that's why we are all inclined towards safety, not just because it's required, but because it's the right thing to do. And in order to learn, something I've always said, in order to learn, our students need to feel safe. And in order to teach, our teachers need to feel safe, and all of our employees. So we're going to start here with our visitor sign-in process and procedures. And I just want to mention that this is something has come about after a lot of time and energy and a couple committees, one of them being the CUSD Safety Committee, but also our Pupil Services Task Force. And that was a committee that came out that we met with last year to look at how we dealt with student records, to look at student confidentiality. And in that process, we noticed that our old visitor sign-in sheets had students' names visible to anybody that walked in, the reasons why people were visiting them, which might be a medical issue or a personal issue. And so that student confidentiality was an issue. And so we needed to update our policy. I also want to acknowledge a few people that have helped this initiative and make this happen. One being Jay Hotchner, our CUSD Safety Committee co-chair, who's really championed this initiative and done a lot of the behind-the-scenes work to make this happen. And speaking of the behind-the-scenes work, Crucita Martinez, the office coordinator at Rincon and Foothill High Schools, created the template after a lot of work to, it's amazing what goes into just a piece of paper and a formal worksheet like that everything just has to be just right. And when there's one margin a little bit too far to the left, you got to go back to the drawing board and reformat and recreate. So I especially want to thank those two. And I also want to thank all of the office coordinators, office staff that has given us input. We've gone back and forth saying, how's this, how's that design, what works best for you. So there's been a lot of input. And I also want to acknowledge the parents and other visitors that have been experiencing this new change, this new procedure, and I want to thank them for their patience and their flexibility in doing something new. I know change can be challenging, so I want to express my appreciation to everyone there. So what did we used to do? So in order to know where we are now and where we're going, we need to look at what we used to do. So here are a photo of a few sign-in sheets we used to have. As you can see, Anyone that walks in could see the last person that had picked up a student, met with a student. I know in my years at Carpinteria High School, we had meetings that were really personal and confidential, and that information, someone would be able to see on the visitor sign-in sheet. So we want to protect that information. We also had a wide variety of procedures or methods different at every site. If you went to one site, it would be a whole different sign-in form and ID badge at the other site. So we want to also create uniformity. So that way, if you've got a student at 2 or 3 different schools, you're used to the same procedure. If you're a guest speaker or visiting a school site, it's the same procedure. It not only looks like we're more organized and working together and cohesive district-wide, but it also it'll be a faster, more efficient process if we are uniform. So that's another reason for this change. So when we looked at the board policy regarding visitor procedures, we found that we were not at the time compliant with our own board policy. It requires us to request specific information, which we were not doing at every site. It also gives us more direction and information regarding the visitor procedures, and I'll trust everyone to look at that on their own. Another important piece, and I mentioned this with our Pupil Services Task Force, is FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. Federal law protects the privacy of student education records. If a person walks in to the office and says, I'd like to meet with this student, unless they show ID and show that they're the parent guardian, they do not have the right to do that. And FERPA protects them from that. Common sense protects that from that. But we needed to create a system that that allowed our office staff, that empowered our office staff, and gave them the ability to be consistent with FERPA and HIPAA as well, if it's a medical issue. So what we put together, again, what Crucita Martinez at Rincon and Foothill began putting together, and it's been added to and amended, is our current visitor sign-in sheet, which is now at every school site, and almost every school site. We're still have yet to get it Rincon. It'll be here in the next day or two, or maybe is it today? Tomorrow. Okay, so tomorrow, every school site. We do have 2 different versions, one in English and one in Spanish. I apologize that I don't have the Spanish version here. And if you've had the opportunity to go into a school and fill out this form, there are specific procedures in place that basically identify someone who is a irregular visitor, first-time visitor, so that we can do the appropriate checks and verification to make sure that they're allowed to be on campus. There's a system for regular visitors or routine visitors, and also one for our staff and employees. And that's all connected with the ID badges. Here's an example of the visitor ID badge. I'm wearing the staff ID badge, and then our routine visitors are orange ID badges. So that way, whenever an adult is on our campus that is not a student, or that we know who they are, or that they have the proper identification to be on our campus. In campuses that, Carpinteria High School, for example, that's open, we want to make sure that this person has already checked in at the office and has permission to be on campus. Or in other sites, if someone didn't go through the proper procedures to get on campus, we want to make sure that they're removed from campus. So it's our way of having a visual with these ID badges to make sure that every adult on campus has approval to be there. And again, this is for the safety of our students and our staff. That's just a brief overview of our visitor sign-in sheet procedures and the changes that have happened. Another initiative that our safety committee is working on, and again, there's many, but another one is our focus on mental health. When people often think about safety, they may think about structural safety, they might think about our visitor sign-in sheet or fire drills and things like that, but a very important aspect of our safety is our wellness, including our mental health and mental wellness. And so with that in mind, a subcommittee of the Safety Committee was created, the Mental Health Subcommittee. And at the same time, several initiatives are been presented through the Safety Committee regarding mental health. And this has come with the passing of Assembly Bill number 2246 that Dave Moore from HopeNet mentioned. And I thank Dave for being here and representing that, because this is now law. So it's not, and starting this next school year, we will need to have a policy in place. And so Kirsten Escobedo, our Director of Special Education, is working with that committee to prepare our district to be compliant with this law, but also to make sure that we are doing all we can to look at all the aspects of safety for our students and staff. And this is just one more piece or aspect of that. So I'm going to have Kirsten Escobedo come on up to talk a little bit about this committee. And for those, well, I'm not going to repeat the Assembly Bill because it's in print, and also Mr. Moore mentioned it when he came up here as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Glover.
Thanks, Barnaby.
All right, thank you. Good evening. As Mr. Moore mentioned and Mr. Gloger mentioned, we are working on this mental health subcommittee within the context of the Assembly Bill 2246. I think it's important to highlight that we do currently have a board policy in place that focuses on suicide prevention. One of the main distinctions of this new Assembly Bill is that it specifically targets the need to look at the needs of high-risk groups. And so that's something that's a change that we are taking into this process. Just to give you a little bit of what we've done, the subcommittee has met twice, and we have included, that committee has included Mr. Hotchner. I've attended. We have had a high school counselor, school psychologist. Mr. Moore has also been a part of those subcommittees, a librarian, and a secondary administrator. And our work at this point is really focusing on what can we do to prevent and educate. And the goal is to streamline what we're doing consistently across the district. So all of our elementary schools are doing the same thing and teaching and implementing preventative practices the same way. As you are aware, we currently have counselors, school psychologists, and START therapists at all of our school sites. And so part of the work that we're doing related to them is implementing, the goal being to implement consistently how they're responding to students. And we do currently have a suicide response protocol in place, and they are trained in doing risk assessments, and we're really working on streamlining that. The other piece that I think is new as part of this process is looking at how we educate and in what aspects do we educate. What type of resources do we make available in school libraries, for example? How do we publicize those being available to students? How do we integrate things into the curriculum that help to teach students about the importance of healthy social emotional well-being and what that looks like? And if you're feeling like you need some extra assistance, where might you go to get that assistance? For example, how do we integrate that into a health class? What other classes what we might look at doing that in there as well. We've also discussed the importance of ongoing training for staff. Our high school teachers did have the opportunity to attend a mental health first aid training at the beginning of this school year. We're looking at expanding that going forward, and also making sure teachers are aware of warning signs to look for as well. And then finally, how do we integrate community resources and make that available on our school sites? What community resources will we have available at all of our school sites that will be easily accessible by students and families? Any questions?
I have a couple. But
Yeah, I have some too. Go ahead.
Thanks for the presentation, Barnaby. I'm intrigued by the screening that Mr. Moore mentioned. That I think he said Boston School District is doing, where along with vision and hearing tests, they're doing mental health screening. I'm curious how that would work. If we'd need parent permission to perform those tests, or if if it's feasible in our district to do that, and who we could potentially utilize to perform the screening.
Those are all great questions, and that's one of the things that the subcommittee is looking at exploring. And we did also meet with Susan Grimmersey from Behavioral Wellness to talk with her about what resources are available as well, and also to really get her take on what she felt like, how the screening would be appropriate for us. And so it's one of the resources that we're considering. I think to your question about how do we implement that, that's something that we would have to explore, because it would be additional resource allocation with our mental health folks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dave, I'd like if you want to step at the podium, that'd be great.
Here, if you can hear me.
Well, no, we got to get you. We got to get you on the television.
Oh, okay.
That way you'll live in
Pretty low standards
perpetuity.
here. All I was going to say was, it seems to me like the logical thing to do is somebody from the district to call Boston, and just kind of pick their brain. It seems silly to reinvent the wheel. And I wish I had more details for you, but I just read it in an article in Time Magazine, and the immediate response in my mind was, well, it's a huge district. But the flip side of that is, if it's a huge district, they got a lot of kids to deal with. So in terms of finances,
well, they got a lot of resources there with the
well, they do, but
universities,
then they also have a large amount of kids, so they would require a lot of resources. So I don't pretend to have any answers to any of those things, but it seems like we could find out easily enough by just giving them a holler.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good thing for the subcommittee to look into.
Can I make a suggestion? That Dr. Dowdy from UCSB is a good resource for local resource.
Yes.
Maybe she has some ideas. Okay.
Thank you.
We must have all been on the same psychic page, because I have a little post-it here for my comment section today that says mental health assessment. So some people from the community have already mentioned this to me weeks ago, actually. So I'm definitely in favor of this. And I don't know if any of you who've had children, part of your postnatal, after you have a kid, your postnatal assessment is this kind of goofy questionnaire. It's literally a questionnaire that says, how are you feeling today? How have you felt? And it's their screening for postpartum depression. And something, obviously age appropriate, as simple as a questionnaire would be, I think, a simple and perhaps cost-effective first step. I think the key, though, is how you interpret those results then. And then, I was able to then have a conversation with my doctor once she looked at that. So, somebody has to kind of interpret the data, but I think there's cost-effective. I would imagine there might be smaller districts than Boston who are also implementing something and that we could model our program on. And I would also, I know the Assembly bill says for students in grades 7 to 12, but I don't see any reason why it couldn't be implemented at a younger stage, again, as age appropriate.
Yes, and to comment on that, that's something that the subcommittee has talked about extensively as well, how we educate our secondary students, even the difference between middle school and high school students, and how we talk with them about mental wellness and mental health and suicide is very different than how we would talk to our elementary school students about feeling good and feeling happy, but implementing age-appropriate curriculum. Yeah.
I also think that mental issues is a national concern. Mm-hmm. Other district, I don't think that there's a way to differentiate between someone who's having a mental problem or someone who does not. It could be the other way around, because basically a student, perfect student, could be undergoing tough issues, and no one actually would be able to point that out. Mm-hmm. So my question is, how can a district differentiate between someone who's having any kind of problem? Could be mental, could be whatever. Could be himself or herself, or it could be problems in the home for whatever reason. How can we address that?
It's a good question. So the district has different levels of intervention in place to address these needs, which is not to say that there isn't always room for growth, right? But what we currently are doing is we have academic counselors who are available to meet with students and who do meet with students. And they are trained if there's an issue that comes up. And there is a referral to our START counselors, and our START counselors are contracted with Family Service Agency and CADA, Council on Alcohol and Drug Abuse. We also have our school psychologists who are trained to provide support to students. So our START therapists are usually considered to be more of a short-term intervention for a few months. They might also, when they're working with students and families, make referrals out to the community for if the family system is showing that they might benefit from some additional support. Our school psychologists are one of the resources that we provide as mental health supports for students with IEPs. They also do work with students who are on 504 plans and also might be in crisis.
Yeah,
So-
because there's problems like violence in the street, in the home, within himself, herself, and I was just wondering how
Right.
we can help them out.
And I think the other piece of that is something that we've talked about extensively on the subcommittee is really destigmatizing the conversation about those kinds of issues so that students and families do feel comfortable coming forward and asking for help.
I think specifically with suicide, I think that mental health first aid class specifically addressing suicide could be really helpful because I've had some training with suicide prevention and there are specific, very concrete instructions that you can give people. I think that peer-to-peer connection with suicide in the teenage years can really help. So for instance, if someone might tell their friend, I'm having suicidal thoughts, but they wouldn't tell their parents or a teacher. So a student who hadn't been given the training might think, oh, well, I don't know what to do. That's too intense. But if they'd been given the training, they might understand that the next critical step is to tell an adult. Do you know what I mean? So I think that I personally would love to see that mental health first aid extended specifically for suicide at the high school level, like as soon as possible, really.
I also just want to put out there that possibly inviting Maria Fisk from the Children's Project, just because that's another place that's in town that has many of those partner agencies there that our families and students can access, and it's kind of confidential because it's away from their regular campus. And so, CADA's there, Family Service Agency, CALM.
Yes, and she has not been able to attend any of our meetings. I think it's just been a scheduling conflict, but she's been a great a resource already.
And we do currently have an MOU with them, but if that's something we need to revisit and add things to, please let us know.
Okay. Thank you.
Also, another thing, Barnaby, it's just two badges, the color red and orange.
The badges.
Yellow.
Oh,
Yellow.
So red, orange, and yellow. There's three colors, three levels.
Okay.
So
That's
staff
very good.
member, routine visitor, and regular visitor, or one time.
are we going to talk about sign-in procedures
Yeah,
a
so
bit? Because I have some questions and issues
I
too.
have a few as well.
Okay.
So I really appreciate all the work that you have all
Yes.
done on. Thanks, Kirsten.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All the work you guys have done on the safety and basically homogenizing the sign-in procedure. I think that was the new sign-in forms. Initially, are very confusing because you're looking for the line because you see the sign-in here, but once you've done it, it's easy. But what I'm concerned about is all the campuses are different, and the procedures that we're following it. Everyone's trying to follow the same procedures, yet the architecture and the logistics are quite different. And just as an example, at Aliso, the old entry, the office is at the front of the school, and you would go into the office, sign in, and you go back out of the office and through the chain link fence. Now the procedure is you come into the office, you sign in, you have to make the circuitous path through boxes, through the back room, through the closet, through the staff break room, into the cafeteria, and then into the campus. And one, I think it's unsafe. Two, it's potentially, we run the risk of those are areas where students may be getting medical attention and things like that. So I think my suggestion is that we allow each campus to be flexible in the way they implement their entry. Everyone signs in, but we don't necessarily have to go through this. I don't quite understand why we're doing it this way, and maybe you could clarify. But I think we should until we have, until we go through the upgrades and updates with the Major U projects. I think we need to allow the campuses to be a little more flexible in the way they allow visitors to access.
Yeah, so specific to Aliso, I don't know why or how that change happened as far as going through the gate versus the circuitous way, but I experienced it firsthand and had the same concerns as you did. I don't think that's the best way to enter that facility, but I also don't think leaving the office and going through the fence that's unlocked and anybody could go through without any supervision is the best way either. So both of those entryways are not best practices as far as safety goes, and they are not what the safety committee has been recommending. We've been recommending, for the last year and a half, almost 2 years, that through Measure U and through other efforts, there be a secure entryway, ingress, egress to the Aliso campus during school hours. And so I agree with you. I don't think that the sign-in sheet I don't know if that coincided with that change or if that was timing.
No, I think they implemented the sign-in sheet last year, and then this year they implemented the
coming in and going switched to the inner sanctum point during the year. I don't think it totally corresponded.
No,
with
the sign-in sheet we started last year. The sheets changed last year,
we just started the sign-in sheet a month ago, I think.
Yeah, if I could comment on that, how that all happened. Yeah. So Barnaby spoke to the single point of access was what the safety committee was emphasizing, and so around the time, or I don't think it was exact, that the new visitor sign-in sheet was launched, so to speak, is when Dr. Fox was trying to establish the single point of access. But if I can speak for Dr. Fox, she shares your concerns as well and has some privacy concerns about, students going through what is essentially a kind of nurse's office room, and it doesn't seem to be an appropriate entry for teachers and staff. And then, we've discussed with their facilities folks about, moving the fence, moving the chain link fence, and it seems like a fairly simple option, but then you have to consider DSA and Department of State for Architects and ADA access, Americans with Disabilities Act access, and it actually turns out to be a very expensive project that actually would then be undone when we put Measure U in place. So there's really not an easy solution for that right now. So I like your idea of allowing the site to be flexible in light of what's happening with Measure U.
Yeah, I mean, my only recommendation is it doesn't really make sense to correct a potential deficiency with an even greater deficiency, and I just think it would until we can make a easily accessible single point of access, that we allow the site to maybe return to using that gate, and maybe we can ask the visitors to shut the gate. It's a rolling gate there, and that's what they were doing this week during parent-teacher conferences.
And we can ask our facilities department to put some pretty big and loud signage on that rolling gate to direct them back to the office to sign in. And
but at the same time, I can see it both ways. I mean, like I'm trying. Yeah, I agree that the priority is safety, and the way it is right now, it's safe. but at the same, but the other way around, if visitors have, we cannot rely on visitors like locking the gate. We cannot. That's the way I see it. There's always either way. It's not the safe way to do it. That's how I see it. It's 50-50
yeah.
either way.
As a parent who is over at Aliso almost every day, it's also there's so many issues with it. It's really untenable the way it's set up right now, because as a parent of a TK kid, so my kid's over in the parking lot area, and nothing is posted on any of the gates, which I understand, but as a parent, I have no idea when the gates close, when they open, when they're locked, when they're unlocked. And then in the morning, if I go by a certain time, I can get my daughter in and out that way. But then otherwise I have to walk all the way around through the nurse's station. Then I pick her up before the rest of school is out. Sometimes I can go through the gate. It's not at all set up for the use that it's using right now. And I actually think it makes it less safe, because now with that big rolling gate locked, if there was an earthquake or some situation where the entire campus had to be evacuated at once, they would be stuck. They'd be like penned in. And also the situation with having to put up collateral in order to get a visitor's badge. Again, if I'm leaving my car keys at the front and there's an earthquake and I want to get my daughter off campus as soon as possible, and I have to go through the office to get a locked box to get the keys, do you know what I mean? I actually think that makes things less safe. So the collateral, two things. I think the collateral situation, maybe they could just photocopy your ID, or as a parent keep it on hand or something. I don't understand why we have to put up collateral to pick up our kid on campus. The second piece is maybe each family could be issued a parent ID badge that they could share among the family to wear on campus. Because I think if we're creating a situation where, like for my mom, she volunteers 1 day a week on campus, and she's really frustrated with this whole situation at Aliso, it's making her not want to participate there anymore. And also from the Aliso situation, there's no clearly marked exit sign. So that's probably a code violation too, because you don't know which way to go out. So I've gone through Dr. Fox's office by accident through the cafeteria, and I'm someone who knows that school really well. I went to school there. So anyways, I think Aliso especially needs to be completely reconfigured, and I think there's some options. The break room used to be the old principal's office. There's some music rooms that used to be, I think there's a way that maybe over the summer, there maybe needs to be a stopgap measure for now till the end of school year, and then over summer, a complete rethinking of the fence and everything.
Well, I think the problem with that is that anything
with
we
Measure U
do we'd have to be compliant with current standards. So if you go about a repair or an upgrade, it opens a big can of worms. Just like at the high school, we're upgrading because we're doing upgrades, we have to go, all those sidewalks around the entire campus.
Right.
That are perfectly good.
Right. Maybe there's a way you could just lock the whole gate and just say if you want everyone to come through, I don't think that kindergarten gate should ever be unlocked or something.
So I'm sure that I'm listening to the feedback from the board. I'm sure that we could work together to kind of perhaps suspend some things at Aliso. It sounds like that's the most problematic site, but Michelle has more.
I just want to kind of comment listening. I think that these are all great protocols to put into place when Measure U.
When the campus is designed properly.
Because in realistic terms, we're thinking that the dangerous person is going to check into the office, right? So that's not going to happen in every single one of our campuses. Somebody can get in at the moment, except for maybe Catalino now that it has. I mean, it's harder, But the purpose of badges are not to stop somebody from coming in. They're to identify people if somebody comes in. So I think that kind of making it a police state to get a badge or whatever is not what the intent of the badge is. So
I don't think it's the intent of the policy. Well, it shouldn't be the intent of the board policy.
Yeah. So it's meant to, if there is an active shooter or something, that somebody is wearing a badge that can be identified. So maybe if I I agree. I think the Aliso thing is a huge issue, but for the other campuses,
Well, and our parents,
they're all open.
Are parents always considered visitors if they don't come during regular pickup hours? Is that a typical thing for schools? It just seems, I don't know.
I believe
Yeah,
under this
okay.
new system, yes.
Yeah, board policy, ed code, parent is a visitor.
A parent is a visitor, okay.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to share a couple of things. I only have the 5th grade California Healthy Kids survey in front of me. There's also one for 7th and secondary. So the question for 5th graders, this is district-wide, do you feel safe at school? 61% of the 5th graders say yes all of the time, and 25% say yes most of the time. So 86%, and then 12% say yes some of the time. And then do you feel safe on your way home to and from school? 74% of the students say yes all of the time, 14% say yes most of the time, and 8% yes some of the time. And then for the staff, and there was 146 staff who completed this survey, is school a safe place for students? 100% of the staff either feel, 45% agree with that statement, and 55% of the staff strongly agree with that statement. And is the school a safe place for staff? 42% agree with that statement, and 58% strongly agree. Zero disagree on both of those things. So I think those are numbers that the district can be proud of, that few people have a sense of safety, and I'm sure that a lot of that has to do with the work of the safety committee and the conversation that we've been having over the last couple of years about ensuring safety on all of our campuses. So, credit to Mr. Hotchner and Mr. Gloger.
Yeah, I would, the only thing I'd like to echo what Maureen said as far as we don't want to, one of our concerns when we started down this path a couple of years ago was that we were going to discourage families from wanting to come to campus. And it sounds like we're achieving that, even though it isn't a goal. So I think we should, the safety committee should revisit some of these policies and then maybe report back to us with some amendments or revised recommendations.
Okay. Well, I think there's been a number of suggestions and concerns shared, so there's a lot to digest and there's a lot to look into. So I'll have to look back at the YouTube video to catch everything. I do want to distinguish the difference between the access point of Aliso and the visitor sign-in sheets. That they're two distinct, different things. They can go hand in hand, but they're separate. That I couldn't agree with all of you more. That the access point of Aliso, from a safety perspective, from a student confidentiality perspective, needs improvement. But with all of this,
the sign-in sheet's great. Yeah, but you're talking about access.
I'm talking about the access points.
Yeah.
So I thought.
Yeah.
I thought it was a concern shared about the sign-in sheet at Aliso, not the access point at first. So I was just
the
catching
sign-in
up
sheet's
with
fine.
that.
Just from a convenience standpoint, middle school, I think we're conflating the two issues. Visitor sign-ins versus, some nefarious visitor that's going to cause harm, and at the middle school, it'd be just as easy to have the door open at the end of the hallway like it used to, which is adjacent to the parking lot. Have it well signed. Visitors walk down the hall, sign in at the office, and then are able to, go about their visit, versus walking all the way around the school and coming in the front. There's because I think we've essentially combined these two things, and I think they're separate. Basically we're assuming that any visitor potentially has some ulterior motive to be on campus that isn't good, and I mean that's the way that's the way this new policy and the way it's being implemented is coming across, and I know that's not the intent, but I think we need to revisit these things this because that's coming across to a lot of the community, and that's not the message we want to send. We want to have the campus be inclusive, open. People can stop by without having to feel like they're going through some, security checkpoint.
But we want the campuses safe.
Right.
Yeah, and
But I don't think it's unsafe. This is where I may have disagreement with the safety committee. I don't feel the campuses are unsafe the way they were. I think, as Maureen said, I think they're almost more unsafe now than they were before. That's just my feeling, because so I would just encourage some further consideration of some of these policies.
I mean, for me, safety is a huge concern. My daughter started school. She started TK when she was 4, so she's a little tiny baby, and so she was coming from main school, the Children's Project there, where they have a locked door. Every parent has a security code that they put in. It's a very secure system. So I don't have a problem with there being security. I just think it has to make sense. If there's a 4-foot fence surrounding the kindergarten, you know what I mean? Like, just the way it's set up a little bit at Aliso doesn't make, like, there's not a lot of common sense about it. And the other thing too is, I think, God is in the details. So I think I really support your overall approach, and a lot of these things are great. So I think now we need to work out the kinks and kind of figure out how to implement these things successfully at each school. The other thing too is I don't know, I know some members of the public have personally contacted me about it, so I don't know if the district has received feedback or letters about things at all.
I've received a few. I wouldn't say a lot. I've received a few. And I know we want to offer an opportunity for our school office coordinators and office staff to give feedback to the safety committee, because they really are on the front lines of the work. So they were at a meeting with Mr. Hotchner and actually all of us as a group when we decided to launch the new sign-in form. And so I'd like to make sure that they have an opportunity to formally register their feedback as well, and then have the safety committee take everybody's feedback into account. And I definitely have I take notes, and then we have cabinet tomorrow, so I definitely have Aliso on the top of the list here.
The last thing, I had one last thought, which was that community buy-in is going to be really important for something like this. And I felt like the way things were rolled out, it was a little jarring. If I don't know if parents were notified, but maybe we need more notification and like a month's worth of, if there's like a parent safety group at each school that's like helping us, I just think if there was a little bit more parent and grassroots support at each school, that it would help with these big, because this is big, this is something you do every day. And so if suddenly it changes and you don't understand why, I think then people get frustrated and then they'll stop volunteering. And I don't think that's what we want. So
to dovetail on that, I think parents were notified through an email or Parent Square. My husband read that and he's like, oh. Anyway, I got an earful. But first of all, thank you for all that you've done. And I think just to sum up what here said is you have a policy, and I think it's very important to communicate with the parents. And the reason why I think it's important to incorporate what Andy says about we want schools to be a welcoming place. So while we have a security policy in place and we have systems and procedures, it's important for parents to know why we're doing this. Mm-hmm. Why do we have the badges and the colors? Not just because we want to make your life miserable by giving us something so we can give you a badge, but it's just to make sure that who's supposed to be there and who's not. So I think giving the reason why is equally important. And so I could also tell my husband why, which is equally important to me.
So, Barnaby, so safety, okay. Number one, the sign-in process, okay? That's basically the project. Number two, but for whatever reason, I thought that the safety itself was also included, like protecting the physical integrity of the students.
The physical what?
I thought that the safety of the students were also included along with the sign-in process, like an intruder walking in.
Mm-hmm.
at any time without being noticed. That's why whenever I see those that fence, that's what I think. Well, this is protecting the students from someone just walking in at will. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, this is a huge task, and I thank you. I thank you.
Thanks, Barnaby.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The grilling well for your first week back. That's good. Second week. Sorry. Well, that explains it. Okay, we'll move on to F1. F1, Board Policy 5330, Business and Instructional Operations, Travel Expenses, second reading.
I move we approve the second reading of Board Policy 3350, Business and Non-Instructional Operations Travel Expenses.
Second?
Any discussion?
No.
I just, there's going to be I'm going to have even more questions tonight than usual because I sent some emails to Jamie, which due to everything couldn't get back. So I just wanted a little bit more background about why this policy, what kind of this, is it just legislation has changed or is there an actual?
Right. So this actually came to at the last board meeting for the first reading,
Right.
and there was a background page on it.
Okay. So I'll just
and we
review
gave the
that.
background on that, and it's just to include the legislative updates and
Okay.
to more accurately reflect what our current practice is.
And we didn't have a policy before, is that correct?
We did. It was out
We
of
did.
date.
It was out of date.
This
Okay.
is basically just bringing our
Just an
current
updated-
practices
right,
up to,
forward.
bringing our policy up to what our practices are.
Okay. And the only thing that stood out to me in the second reading this time was that there weren't any mentions of any funding limitations on, is that typically included like so much travel or, because we're saying every travel has to be approved beforehand. Is that what this says? Because it doesn't seem like it said I don't know.
Well, basically, any travel request goes to the board. It's
Okay.
supposed to go to the board for approval.
As long as it's over $1,000, I believe.
$1,000, okay.
And is that in the policy?
That's in a different policy.
Oh,
that
in a
we
different
have. Yeah.
policy. Okay, that's why I didn't see it here. Okay. So basically, travel requests have to go to one. They over $1,000. They get approved. That's covered by another policy. This is specifically about
Travel policy. So this is just to reflect our practice in the district, like the protocols that we go through to get travel. But for the most part, if it's a conference request, it still comes to you. Most things come to you.
right. But then this is just. It seemed like reimbursement for driving.
Right. So,
Yeah.
for example, if I drive to Bealton for an LCAP meeting and turn in my mileage for $43, we don't put that on the board agenda. But if someone were flying to Boston for, $3,000, then we would put that on the agenda. So that's where the difference in dollars comes in, is on
Okay.
things like that.
Is there any chance that a drive could be, I'm just trying to think of like worst case scenario. Is there any case where a drive would be more, where someone would be asking us to reimburse more than, I don't know.
So part of our process for travel reimbursement, they require, I think this is a county, that they require a Google Maps attachment. So you have to actually document how far you have gone.
That's a new escape program.
I'm going to let Maureen take over.
So this is just the
Didn't used
general
to be
board
that way.
policy. We have internal practices that have forms, approval paths. Part of it goes into escape that's measured. Reimbursements require receipts and either a MapQuest or a Google Maps printout. I mean, there's a lot of procedures behind the scenes here. This is just the general legislative and legal language that allows us to have a policy on travel.
Okay. So it's just a very general framework?
Very general.
Okay.
Right.
And so it's not meant to be...
No, and the other thing that a lot of districts don't have with this policy, because even when we were updating this, I think I probably looked at 40 other districts just to see how old theirs are, and there are still districts out there with 20 and 25-year-old policies, and they're all beginning to update them because legislation changes and different things, practices change. But most districts don't have an administrative regulation to go with this that says how we implement the board policy. So, I mean, that's not something that's necessary, but it might be something we consider as we, in the business office, are we doing all of our forms? making sure things go through right approval paths, making sure that funding is approved before it happens. Those are all things that we do on the back end from this policy.
Yeah, I think that's effective. That makes things flow more smoothly if the board policies are then implemented with kind of a clear guideline of, because otherwise I think things can get lost, in translation a little bit.
We have all those policies that back this up.
Right.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
So it's almost like we have the practice, but not the policy.
The policy was outdated for the practice. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, move on to Board Policy 3470, Business Non-Instructional Operations, Debt Issuance and Management, first reading.
I move that we approve Board Policy 3470, first reading.
I second.
And
Any discussion?
yeah, just a little bit of more background on this as well.
So unfortunately, we have to put the board policy before we have a resolution. So there's a resolution that comes later that backs this up. So in December, Senate Bill 1029 was passed regarding districts to adopt a formal policy on debt issuance. And this is related to the debt issuance for our bond sales. And if we did anything other than bond sales, like a certificate of participation, any purchase of like debt, in the form of a long-term obligation to the district requires us to have a policy and to follow the Senate bill on the debt-to-return ratio limits. And really what this bill is doing is addressing what happened several years ago with some districts who borrowed debt, who engaged in debt and had a debt return ratio in the double digits and in the 20%. So let's say you borrow $1, you're paying back $25. So if you borrowed $1 million, you paid it back $25 million. This assembly bill is capping that debt ratio that a district can enter into. So they can't obligate 100 years out to future generations. So it's a safety measure for districts. It's a safety measure for taxpayers. It's a safety measure for long-term obligation.
And it's Senate Bill 1029?
1029.
And it was just passed in
December. It was effective January 1.
Okay.
And so all districts must adopt a policy and must do the resolution. It's very wordy, it's very technical, but the gist of it is to cap our debt ratio.
Great. Okay, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, move on to business operations, facilities, and warrants. Can I get a motion? Actually, wait. Let's before we do warrants, let's talk about D5 and D6.
Oh, right.
So
Which one?
D5 was a
Pulled out of consent.
contract proposal by Van Sand Structural Consultants for work at the Baylord property to design and get permitted a 700 square foot rain-through wood deck that would replace the existing deck. The proposal was for $5,800 and will be paid for from Baylord property funds. I believe, Maureen, you had a question on that?
Yeah, I just we've been hearing we've heard a few different things on the Baylord property, and I don't know. I guess it's just I don't know a lot about it, so I'm wondering if I wanted to ask some questions here, mostly just to say maybe it should be added as an agenda item, like an overview of the Baylord property or where it's at now. Is it a rental property? It
is. I think there's 2 or 3 rentals there, and we do get pretty good rent, right?
Right, we do collect rent.
But we do have to. I mean, the maintenance. The house it's an older house.
Mm-hmm. You'll see roof repairs, plumbing repairs, I mean, we have to maintain the properties.
I agree with you that over the years that the expenses seem to be more or less evened out by the revenue.
Right.
So it's not. I don't think it's a big winner. I mean, I've had some ideas on what we could do with Baylord property. And I'm going to have a discussion with some folks next week, hopefully, that would maybe lend itself to better district use, with
Right.
maybe some faculty housing,
Yeah.
community housing.
Yeah,
And how much was it bought for?
I don't remember, but
Or-
I
or
don't know
the-
if
or
we can,
the
I don't know if we actually can
or
talk
the-
about that.
I don't
'cause
think.
it's
I
not
think we're getting
agendized,
off the
so
agenda, but
If you want to,
Let's add it
further
to the
agenda
agenda.
item.
I've noted,
for the
yeah,
future.
yet the
Yeah.
future agenda items, that'd be the great
Perfect.
place.
So
still need a
we still
motion.
need a motion. Can I get a motion to approve the contract with Van Sand Structural?
I move to approve the contract by Van Zandt Structural Consultants Incorporated for the Baylor property.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, item D6 was the approval of a contract with the tent merchants for rental at CHS.
Yeah, and
I
move
let's get a motion
yeah,
first.
I
then we
move
can
to approve the contract with the tent merchant for rental at CHS.
Second.
Okay.
And again, curiosity. I'm not familiar with the dugout over there as it is now, and just kind of wanted to
Let me
kind of
give
hear a little
background.
bit about why we need a tent rental.
So it's kind of it was a bit of a fiasco.
Okay.
And so the Lions Club raised some money.
Okay.
Not even a contract. A contract was issued without the district's approval.
Is it at where
It's
is
at the softball
this?
field.
I know where that is.
Yeah. The built.
It's like directly adjacent for the tennis courts.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So
Right.
the backstop and the dugouts were almost completed without any ADA approval. No
Okay.
design, no anything. We had to remove them. Unfortunately, it was a really
Okay.
bad. It wasn't a good happy time.
Okay.
But we made a commitment to the girls softball team that we would build them dugouts. But because of the process through the state architect
Yeah.
and the very tedious, lengthy time it takes to go through them, it's not happening. So instead of having the girls sitting out in the sun, last season and this season we've rented tents for
Okay.
them. And I imagine according to Dave, because I speak to him on this issue quite regularly because it's important to the program, but also there's a number of community members that are quite interested in it.
Mm-hmm.
We should have an approved set of plans for the facility there in May. So we won't it won't be constructed until summertime, so that they won't be able to utilize it until next season. That's the reason for the expense.
So just to visualize, there's like a dugout that's not complete or something, or
No,
there's
nothing there. It's just
it's a field.
No, it's a concrete
Okay.
concrete sidewalk.
Oh, okay.
This will sit outside the field, and
But to give them a shady
them a
spot
shady
to hang
spot
out while they're
for
waiting
their
to
benches.
play.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Got it.
So
I just needed to understand why we were getting temporary tents around the
Yeah.
field. So thank you.
okay. All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so we'll move on to warrants.
I move we approve the warrants for the period of February 18th through March 3rd, 2017, in the amount of $221,631.06.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, move on to what we're all here for. The second interim report.
I just need it for a second.
Brand new one.
It's
been used.
nice.
It's never been used. That one hasn't either.
That one's not. That's a nice pen.
So, Mr. President, would it be okay to let our interpreter go home? There's no one here taking advantage.
Yes, it would.
I was.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for coming tonight.
Thanks.
You too.
Okay, second interim. So this is our second interim report, which gives you an update on our budget and reflects our actuals through January 31st. This is a requirement under AB 1200, and do it every year. You have some materials that were included in the board packet. One which is a summary of all of our budgets from adoption to first interim. That shows you all of the different reiterations that we've made of our budgets, including last year's estimated and audited actuals. I keep that there for some reference. And it shows you our actuals through January 31st. And that document is called it just says actuals through the 31st, total general fund, unrestricted and restricted sources. And then the other document that you have is the multi-year projection. And I'm going to go through the PowerPoint that will get into some specifics in these. That shows you the multi-year general fund, unrestricted and restricted. And then you have just a fund summary of all of our funds. I am going to go through the PowerPoint that does highlight things on those reports that I think are most relevant for change at this point. The assumptions that went into the second interim budget are very minimal. We didn't do a lot of adjustment. There hasn't been a lot of change. We're not in a period of time where the state's making any changes throughout the year. We did incorporate a couple of things in the multi-year, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. The unrestricted revenues have remained unchanged. We have updated some local revenues, which are donations, parent donations, and other local income that comes in. And we have some very minor adjustments to the expenditures. We've talked about kind of all year how some of the past practice has been to have the budget move with our spending. And we tried in September and then to get first interim to kind of get the whole annual outlook. So in that analysis, we had a couple of adjustments to make, and they were really minor. And then the restricted budgets, the restricted funds, all revenue and expense have to equal. And then there's fund balance there that takes care of the deficit if there is any. This is just at a glance overview of the unrestricted general fund changes. So you can see the local revenue increased to match this increase, and the expense is a little bit higher. This is there are some parent fees in here, but there's also the teacher induction program, or what they used to call the mentor teacher project, where we have mentor teachers assigned through the county, and the county pays us to pay those stipends. And so you see the in and the out. The out will be in the expenditure side. And then we had some staffing adjustments with coding from restricted to unrestricted, and it was very minor. So you can see the total effect to the general fund was a reduction in our fund balance of about $37,000. A lot of that had to do with a part of a teacher that was in the restricted general fund that should not have been there. It was the gate portion that should be in the general fund. So you can see the overall change to the unappropriated fund balance is just under $40,000. So the 37, it rebenches, our expenditures are rebenched for the 3% required reserve. So it's just about $40,000, very minimal. One of the things that didn't happen in this budget version is going through and trying to find where our savings would be for year end. That's the practice that we're doing now, to start building for next year and to be able to look at where our budgets are in line to our spending line by line. So that exercise is happening right now. I included this last time at the first interim. I think this is a really valuable slide. This is our total general fund that shows you the breakdown between what's unrestricted, the dollars for the general operations of the district, and what is on restricted side. The restricted side is the majority of this money is going to be special ed. The rest of it will be Title I, Title II, Title III, and some local money, as well as a couple of other federal dollars that are tied to special ed, to make up a total general fund revenue of just over $26 million. So you can see on the unrestricted side and the restricted side, when you come down to the excess, whether we're deficit spending or not, you see red in both, because the restricted side in general will have a deficit to spend their balances. So balances don't get rebudgeted, they get spent out of through a deficit. Taking a look at our actuals to date, again, this is the total general fund. It shows the differences here, but it also shows the percent of both revenues and expenditures that we've incurred through January 31st. So this isn't as of March, this is as of January. And this test is really intended to say, are we in line per our budget with spending at that point in time? So AB 1200 back in 1990 put in place these stop checks to say, okay, at first interim through October, are you in line? Second interim through January, are you in line? And then if you don't look like you're going to be in line, you have a third interim, which I don't believe we've had to do. And that would say through May, what's your spending going to look like? We don't have to do that because we do look like we're in line and we have our reserves through the next 2 years.
Maureen, can you explain to the new board members what in line means?
So if I saw, let's take certificated salaries. This is 50% through January. So teachers get paid, the majority of the teachers get paid over 10 months. So this is literally at half the year. There are some certificated salaries that start getting paid in July, some that start getting paid in August. The majority start in September. If I saw that at like 60 or 62%, I'd be very worried that my budget was grossly underestimated. So that's the exercise that we go through. Now, this is at a high level by major category, certificated classified benefits. I actually drill down to like the 12,000 account lines to say, where are we budgeted, where are we spending, and why is something not lined up? And that's the practice we've been doing all year. And it takes about a year to get there because there are some things that we would not budget, like coaching, for instance. That wouldn't get budgeted until the spring coaching stipends were put on the board agenda. And so, I'm still hitting some of those milestones to say, okay, where is it and did we do it? To make sure we've captured them at an annual glance. So next year we have an annual picture at adoption. And then you have some minor changes that happen throughout the year rather than these big budget jumps.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I hope I answered that. Probably too much. This is the multi-year at a glance. This is only the unrestricted part of the general fund. Now, I'm going to qualify this. This looked a little bit better at first interim because we had projected, and the board had approved through a budget line item, the take back of the special ed preschool program from the county education office. So in my budget to actuals and looking at my budget in that whole analysis, I kind of like went back to this item. And the information that we had received from the SELPA was the prior 3 years of revenue versus the prior 3 years of expense to estimate the savings of the program. And then the cost of bringing it back versus what that cost was for them. In revising this budget and updating the budget, the SELPA just a few weeks ago gave us a new current year allocation. And when I pulled up those preschool expenses, I went, why is it like a couple $100,000 less? And the explanation was that because so many districts brought their services back into the district, that $600,000 cost is now only $300 and something thousand, which puts our share that much less because it's a shared throughout the SELPA. So the reality is it's going to be a break even for us.
Wait, I don't understand that. So because their services they're not serving as many students.
The cost of the program
and
has
they've
shrunk.
lost all their staff.
But it seems to me that you should have more efficiency with a bigger program than you would with a smaller program.
I think this is a unique program. I mean, I think preschool is the preschool services are not like the regular SPED preschool service, SPED student services because of the nature of the age of the kids. But when you compare the cost at $598,000 last year, and it's $360,000 this year, or $59,000 for our kids. There is a huge
our expenditure this year is $225,000 less than
Last year.
it was last year.
Yes.
I have some questions, which is why Kirsten probably
Yeah.
stayed. You want to come up?
This has been like we're both sitting there going, yeah.
So my first question is, do we have a projected number of how many 3-year-olds that potentially will be coming in next year?
So total students, not just 3-year-olds.
Yeah.
So our new referrals, our students turning 3, and our current students who are in preschool. Right now, the speech-only numbers are between 20 and 25, and then students who require a higher level of service between 5 and 8. Now, I do want to put the caveat on that the county has told me that they are getting a lot of new referrals right now. They're continuing to assess our students until May 1st, and then we'll take over assessing May 1st and start accepting those new referrals.
So if what would be your recommendation of the caseload for a special ed preschool teacher?
So between 12 and 15 students for the
So-
teacher.
So one salary at like a 80,000 or whatever, right? And then for speech and language,
40
okay,
is maximum for preschool students.
so even if we took it back, we'd still be looking at 200,000 or less possibly in staffing costs, which is still a
Probably more
better
And
than paying 300,000 to county. Right.
and also too, we have psych time to consider into that as well.
Yeah, for assessments. Okay.
and some aid. So Kirsten and I sat down and we kind of made the we need to have list, and that this would be great. This would be the ideal list, and this was a check-in with Kirsten and I like last week, and it was like we just kind of looked at each other like what, and I think that I think that there are some. I think that there's going to be like a wash here. We're not going to probably save money in that we are going to have to increase our psych time in order to be able to do assessments. And I think that that's a need we have district-wide also, not just in the preschool program. But I also, we also have some tentative aid time put in here because we may need that. I mean, we have to look at all of the need that may materialize based on how many kids we have. And I think at the count on the SELPA, we had, I think, 9 or 10 on the preschool count that is current. And they just added, I think, 1 from I think there was 8, they added 1, there may be 1 more. So we're like watching that, and we're trying to contain those costs. But there's also, so special ed is, whether it's preschool or gen ed, or our K-12 population is something that is also an investment that we're making for all of the population of our kids, because it helps to make them all in successful environments. So we're trying to be smart and be realistic and not bring something that's not going to come back and like blow out of the water, say, oh, well, we didn't tell you.
So when do we need to have that kind of final decision made? Because we've given the year and a day already, right? And so that's coming up, right? Okay. Because I'd like to kind of maybe explore this on an agenda item later.
I mean, I'd like to, we need to I'd probably dig into this because this is a pretty big.
It's a big chunk.
Pretty big swing. So I think we should probably get this on the agenda in the coming month or so.
So my conversation with the SELPA was, so why, when we were talking about the cost of bringing the program back, did you not tell us that you can't really base it on the prior 3 years because, and that's just they weren't thinking about that?
Well, my thought is that since all these districts were contracting with them, that the money was spread out in salaries all over, and as districts are taking back the program,
that's what happened this year.
And they're losing their staff, their costs have gone down, which has always been a big.
But they should be able
concern.
been able to determine that at the beginning of the year.
You would think, yeah.
I think
Is this coming straight from the SELPA, or is this coming from the county?
Straight from the
county
SELPA.
budget office.
No, straight from the SELPA. And I can tell you that, in my experience, there's not a lot of pre-warning at any level other than the email we get saying, look at the spreadsheet. And it's like a 29-tab spreadsheet that you have to decipher. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. So, what I am going to do, and there's always the last couple of months have been some scheduling conflicts, but there is a monthly meeting with the school business managers and the SELPA managers, and it's usually in Bolton, and I need to make a point to get there with Kirsten and have a voice to say, as districts, you guys have to consider, and there's a lot of other people that are in the same boat with these concerns, that, there has to be a lot more communication when we're doing this planning. And if you know that what we're doing is trying to anticipate costs or savings, you need to say, well, however, you have to understand, they knew at the beginning of the year that these districts were going to be bringing back program. It just didn't become part of the equation. So I'm bringing that to you because that is real, and I didn't want it to, at some point later, all of a sudden pop up.
While we're on this slide, I just did some math here and could be wrong, whatever. But I wanted to know the assumptions that you were working with to go from each year's revenue, because, again, just going on the top revenues, that's our property tax, right?
In this slide, it is not just property tax.
Okay. But it does show a very low increase from year to year. The increase from 2016 to 2017 to 2018 is only $200,000.
So
in increased revenue.
When you go back and to one of the handouts, you see that we are losing one-time money starting next year and the following year.
If you go back to the general fund summary, Maureen,
right,
it shows the actual property taxes. $21,753.
So that it's going to be. So you're saying with the property tax increases.
So if you go,
there'll be a revenue of less than $200,000 increase.
Yes. So if you
from
go
this year to next year with.
Yes.
With property tax revenues increases, because in the following years, from 2017 to 2018 to 2019, it goes up to $600,000, $800,000, $856,000.
So if you go to the multi-year projection on the unrestricted, the second page that says unrestricted general fund,
that's what I'm looking at.
You'll see the property tax increase, and then you'll see these other state revenues and local revenues decrease.
You're talking about the handout.
The handout, not on the slide. This is much more detailed in the handout.
I guess I'm not sure which.
The handout.
I'm looking at this.
No, not the slide. There's an actual handout with the board agenda.
Somehow I didn't get that.
So we are losing one-time money of $355,000 next year. So the governor, for the past 2-3 years, has incorporated in his budget significant pots of one-time dollars to districts. Next year, and so this year it's like just under 490,000. Next year it's going down to 104,000. So those one-time dollars are going away.
Maureen, can I just clarify for the public that these are attachments on the agenda that's on the website?
Yes.
I didn't get. I thought I downloaded everything and I didn't get those, so I'm looking for them right now because I would have looked at this ahead of time.
I can give you my copy.
Sure, that'd be great.
Sure. And then those revenues are completely eliminated in the 18-19 year, assuming there'll be no more one-time dollar allocations. That's the projections that we're working on. I will tell you, too, that the property taxes from the adopted budget to the multi-year projections were increased 4% out years from the current year at adopted. In the first interim, we increased the property taxes based on the tax bills that went out by $178,000. That did not rebench that 4% for the out years because that still is yet to materialize. And if that becomes a true revenue cash number that we get at next month, then we will rebench those 4% projections in the out years. So there is potential that those out years can increase. but we're taking a more conservative approach because property taxes can fluctuate based on big one-time assessments, by moratoriums, and a lot of reasons that would have one-time influx and not ongoing influx. So we want to be careful not to over-project those numbers. We all, hope school district is still in the minds of us all when we over-project property taxes.
And then just when you go with the expenditures, what assumptions were you using based on the increasing expenditures? Just on either of these, whatever's.
For the first interim, for the second interim?
Well, no, I'm just talking about this slide in general, because do these take into account, some of the proposed cuts or not?
No, we have not incorporated any reductions in this.
Even the ones that have been passed?
Nothing's been passed. That was a board study session.
No, we passed the
yes. So
there was a FTE eliminated the lab.
The 17-18 budget has not been built. We're still working under the assumption of the current projections based on first interim.
So this does not include.
Yeah, we approved at that last meeting the authorization to issue a pink slip. That I'm sure that hasn't been incorporated in the budget yet.
No.
Okay, so this does not include.
This does not include any budget reductions.
Okay.
For 17-18
this
or out
is
years.
Purely going on how
current year.
Okay.
And you'll see in the handout I just gave you, Maureen, you'll see all of the increases by category.
I definitely didn't.
It's on that sheet right there. Right. On the unrestricted side, you'll see what, retirement is going up for both STRS and PERS. Health and welfare is going up. There are whatever one-time assumptions in salaries this year have come out. The things that we know happened that can come out are adjusted. We have settlement agreements that are still not incorporated in the out years as far as building a budget. You'll see them on that sheet. So they're all detailed on there.
And so this also doesn't, neither this nor this take into account like the current retirements that we just got today.
There is an assumption on that sheet for retirement savings.
Right. But does that include the ones that have already happened or the ones that have happened as of this meeting?
We don't incur them as they happen unless we know that they're true savings. So that's assuming that we'll have savings of 3 retirees. So if we exceed 3 retirees and have actual savings, that gets built in when we actually build the 17-18 budget, which we're doing now. Mm-hmm. And some of those savings we won't know until after the adoption either, because we don't always get retirements in time for the early April or May budget to be built. So we still have, when you were building 17-18, we're still building a lot of that budget for staffing on the assumptions of what we know we can plan for. We don't always have those positions assigned, savings assigned until we get into September.
So basically those numbers will be quite different from this,
Not
right?
quite. We'll bring to you as...
people who are retiring, how much is that, roughly speaking?
Well, no, they've made the assumption in the budget, Rogelio, that 3 people will retire. Okay. So we haven't realized those yet. Mm-hmm. But if we
have we had 3
but we know their salary, right? Roughly.
If we have more than 3 retirees, then we'll realize more savings.
Yeah, we don't. That's been that's probably the average that we get. Sometimes maybe 1 more or 1 less, but we don't get high numbers in retirement. We also have to understand too that the budget is based on positions and how many positions are authorized, and in today's teacher climate and the recruiting environment that we have, we're not always bringing in brand new teachers at step 1, column 1. Oftentimes, we're competing for a teacher statewide, and we're having to bring in 10 and 12 and 15 years of experience, which has really shrunk that savings cost. So we have to consider all that when we look at how many we may retire out and save in a lower paid teacher. Okay, so the thing to note too is by removing that 225, it does do back to our fund balance what we didn't like to see before, and it reduces our reserve. I also want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we're having right now in building next year's budget based on the way staffing works for our classified folks. So currently we have a practice of especially instructional assistant ones being able to be funded by, whether it's site money or parent funds. And with classified staff, anybody that's hired, regardless of their funding source, becomes part of not just the bargaining unit, but district staff. And they have rights across the district for the positions they're hired in. So having said that, we have run into some real challenges, and we brought this to the budget study session, and I'm bringing it up now because it does impact building next year's budget. As we are talking to either parent groups that can or cannot support the staffing that they have in the prior years and or site funds. And what we're seeing is a lot of staffing inequities among the schools and among the parent groups to be able to fundraise and et cetera, et cetera. It also creates a situation when funding has dried up, local funding, which is very unstable, has dried up, and so that portion won't be funded. That portion of that person has bumping rights throughout the rest of the district based on seniority.
Maureen, I have a question. Okay, you mentioned that classified personnel have rights. Mm-hmm. What are them?
So when a classified person is hired, they have rights in the district for that position based on their seniority, their hire date.
Just that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't matter how they were funded.
So I think what Maureen's getting at is if a parent group could no longer afford to pay for that employee may have seniority over an employee in the same class as instructional assistant 1 that could bump that other employee out of that position because they have seniority.
Roger, actually, I printed out the personnel reduction board policy. If you're interested in, I can pass that down to you. And it specifically addresses seniority there.
So I created a chart that kind of explains all of our instructional assistant 1s. This is the category that's most affected by donated funds. And by school, I've put their enrollment, their FTE by funding source, whether it's general fund, this is all unrestricted dollars. Categorical, most of this is Title I, Title II, or Title III, mostly Title I and III. And then this is the local column, which is mostly parent donations. And in this first orange column, it kind of breaks down the FTE per student. And you can see in our schools the inequities that we have here. And then I also added another column because FTE doesn't mean bodies. There can be pieces of people, you know, an hour, a 2 hour, a 1 1/4 hour. So these are the number of people, oops, I lost my mouse. The number of people at each school in part or in whole funded as an aide. And then this last column is by the number of people serving that school, how many people are serving kids in an aide capacity per student. And you can see how it makes some challenges with the schools that may not be able to fundraise.
Should that say student per staff, not staff per student?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
So I think it's important to look at that student per staff.
Does that include?
Sorry.
Does the staff include the principal as well?
No, this is just instructional assistants.
These are just instructional assistant 1s to students.
Current aides.
So that you can emote the title of the slide.
On the header says it.
And this does not include special ed. This is strict instructional assistant 1s, regular classroom aides that serve all of our student population.
So I think what Maureen is demonstrating is we have a pretty severe equity issue across the 4 elementary sites.
So one of the things that is that with the study session and showing you these staffing, like creating these staffing charts, was to try to provide some equities across the board. And so the next slide is something that shows if we put in a ratio to provide equity, saying the general fund pays for X aides per student, this is as close to what we currently have in the general unrestricted fund, with some minor adjustments and tweaking. So this would say that we will give our elementary schools, which we are investing in highly, most districts don't have these gen ed aides, an aide per 100 students. And by doing that, you can see there's some shifting, but the overall net effect doesn't really change a whole lot. I'll qualify that the middle and high school, most of these are just EL driven. They don't have the same types of aids in the schools. So we're really talking about an equity issue in the elementary schools.
Is this about cost savings or about
No,
equity?
Equity.
Because I actually feel like equity and staffing is a whole issue.
It is.
Unless it has to do directly with cost savings, I'm not sure that we should totally be analyzing it, or directly has to do with this interim budget. I'm not sure that it should be getting analyzed right now, only because I don't feel like that's what we agendized.
So I think Maureen's saying that she needs to have these assumptions. She needs to have these conversations in anticipation of building next year's budget.
Well, I would love to look at equity in terms of, principals and how many students they're serving, and Aliso's having a 0.75 FTE for 426 students.
Well,
that to me is a outstanding equity issue than, this granular analyzation and minutia of assistant and aides.
I totally agree with you. So I'm going to get to what I'm trying to work towards. What I'd like to put in place, and this has all been administratively decided in the past, but I'm sharing it with you because I want it to be something that you're fully aware of, and that there's input in. Is I lost a slide here. Actually, it's at the bottom caveat here that I'd like to assume no further positions are funded by local dollars, so that we are not running into problems again down the road where those local dollars dry up, whether it be parent funding or whatever, and then we're in bumping and a complete disruption of staffing and aids with students site by site. I'm not proposing any eliminations. I'm just saying that we'd like to phase out that ability to fund positions with local money, and that those be funded as they are currently funded out of the general fund.
I agree that it's important to look at equity, and I think that we are talking on the topic of funding, but I think again, this is a fiscal matter that also has policy implications, in the sense that we're basically telling the two schools that fundraise for aids, you either you can't do that anymore, or you're going to risk getting penalized. And I'm not sure that I'm particularly comfortable making that decision again under an agendized budget study session kind of topic. I agree that this is an interesting approach and that there are some interesting changes here, but I don't know that this should be just sort of bundled and packaged under, a budget moment. That perhaps agendizing, instructional aids and a board policy around funding for instructional aids perhaps would be a better approach.
So, Maureen, you're not looking for action here?
No, I'm not.
So she's just letting you know what the policy will be going forward.
Right. This doesn't require board policy. This is not something that I'm presenting for a study session. I'm letting you know that moving forward, we're gonna put a moratorium on local dollars being able to buy people, because we're running into a situation where the dollars for next year have been cut by 2/3 for parent funding and a site, and that's causing a real ripple effect in all of our schools, and it just isn't the best practice. And so I'm trying to be transparent to let you know that that's the mandate that we're going to put out forward.
Well, Jacqueline, don't you agree that this could have unintended consequences?
I think it can, but what I'm hearing right now is that you're not cutting any staff. You're maintaining.
No, we're maintaining what we have and not allowing further staff to be hired.
What I'm also hearing is that it's not, and from being involved at the parents level, there's no immediate danger of parents raising more money at that time. We're all facing extreme cuts in at the parent raising level. So I agree with you that this might have an impact if one school somehow gets a windfall of money. I don't anticipate it happening at both sites that are currently raising funds for AIDS.
And it is important to know that a current issue is that at one of the schools we are having to cut a significant number of staff positions because of parent funding issues. So I think that's also important to be transparent about, that this is going on right now.
Well, so I don't hear, I think what you're concerned about
just generally, this agendized item is an update on the interim budget. It's not a discussion of funding and equity around AIDS. And I think that's an important discussion, don't get me wrong. I know that there's some issues and some bad practices that have been developed throughout the district. I agree that changes should be made and that maybe some board policies should be issued because something got us into this mess. And now,
well, I don't necessarily know that that we're making it an equity issue so much as we're making it an issue where the district has more control over its budgets and over its staffing. Because the way it is now, a site can go and fundraise and hire a staff.
Which may not I don't even know if that may not be legal. I don't know.
It's legal. It just isn't a good practice.
And then the district, if the parent group isn't able to continue the funds, then the district is on the hook for that employee, or they have to potentially lay someone else off.
Right, which I don't think is a great. So I'm saying.
So that's why I think what they're doing is.
If the staff is just changing this at this moment, it feels to me a little bit haphazard again. A little
seems pretty responsible to me, because
I think that we're just trying to be transparent about what we need to do going forward. As Maureen said and Jacqueline summarized, nobody is getting rid of anybody that that is, except for those positions that the one parent group told us they could no longer fund.
Well, I have a question. What about the situation of the Carpinteria Family School?
Mm-hmm.
Is it financially okay?
So the parent group of Carpinteria Family School is down by their funds by about 2/3.
About 2/3.
So that's nothing. I mean, that's almost gone.
Right.
Oh,
that's
more than one.
Which is why we're bringing this to your attention, because it does disrupt the bumping in every school and every classroom of AIDS. So so what we're trying to do is prevent that from happening moving forward. We're not doing anything other than that.
Well, we have who was it? 2 weeks ago or so, we had a family school presentation, and there was nothing mentioned about having financial problems.
So
right?
John Steinman is
correct me
here.
if I'm wrong.
John Steinman is here, and he does the treasury for the parent group. And I want to compliment John and the family school parent group. They came to me directly and talked about their budget issues, and I've been in contact with Maureen and Darlene since then. So John, would you take it over?
As you know, there's been a great deal of uncertainty involving the family school and the parents. Many don't know what's going to happen next. And between that and certain lack of knowledge of what policies are going to be, some people actually think that we're going to be asked to fund other schools and other things like that, has caused our parents to curtail their donations rather dramatically. That, and there was another thing, is policy-wise, you're not allowed to ask for donations. That's always been true, and we actually never have required it. In the past, we've maybe been a little more encouraged. We encouraged people more, but in the last year, we haven't even encouraged parents to donate. And the result of that is much lower donations. And in family school, we have almost no corporate donations. It's all parents. We do get $100 here and $100 there. Thank you to Smart and Final and other donors like that. And but in the past, we've gotten large donations for buying technology. This year, nothing right yet. And so, because we had to make we could have more money coming in through the rest of the year, but we can't make that commitment. So we don't want to commit money that we don't have in the bank right now.
Because what I see right now on the chart is that projected Carpinteria Family School projected.
That's not projected. No. That's current.
That's current. Okay, 73 students, correct?
No. We have. I think it's around 73.
So we're not suggesting that they can't donate money. The only thing that we're implementing is that the money can't buy people. So we welcome all of the donations from parents and our local sponsors and anybody else who wants to support not just family school, but all of our schools.
So why not make that a board why not go through the effort of creating a board policy? Because I think right now what's happening, it sort of reminds me of an easement. Like, things have always happened a certain way because they've always happened a certain way, and then people get used to that. And then if things are just changed in this interim period when things are pretty murky as it is, I don't really think it's best practices. I think what is best practices is making a board, making an agendized item saying we want to consider not allowing donations to be used for staffing, adding it to the agenda, having a discussion on it.
But it's not a board.
That doesn't become a board policy.
It's not a board policy.
So it's an admin. It's
so,
our
but
issue.
you're saying that as a staff, you're going to, moving forward, just decide amongst yourselves that donations can't be used for people.
Yes.
Isn't that a policy decision?
No.
It's an admin decision.
So, okay.
We're just trying to bring it to you to let you know that that's what we're doing.
Well,
we're telling you and the public.
And the public.
So basically 2/3 of donations that are gone, correct?
Yes, for next year.
Next year.
Yes,
So
it's much lower this year.
So a board can't make any policy decisions regarding how donations are spent?
No.
They can't have any control over how they just have to.
No. And most donations, other than like parent donations, most donations come in intended for something. So we have to honor the wish of the donor.
So what if they say they want to donate it for staffing?
Then we go back to the donor and say that's not we don't allow that per policy, administrative policy. And so we would welcome your donation, and these are the things that I'm sure you can work with the site administrator to find uses for.
So the way I see it, well, let's see what happens if the remaining 1/3 of the nations, let's say that they don't get him, they don't get it. Okay, will the Cabrera family school will fall under the district's budget?
The district already funds the family school. They are part of the district. The only thing we're talking about is a very small portion of donated money that pays for classroom aids. The school is funded with the school district's general fund.
Yeah, but if those monies are basically gone,
it will affect how many aides they have in the classroom.
But the aide who's senior can go from family school and bumps an aide at Catalino or Aliso.
So let's Maureen, let's finish with your presentation.
Okay, so the final is talking about the work ahead. It has a lot to do with what we just talked about. We continue.
Thank you, John.
For year end to budget, make sure our budget and our expenditures are aligned, and the timeline is kind of outlined here for the 17-18 process. I hope to have a preliminary budget available mid to late April. I'm hoping earlier than later. A study session scheduled in May, hopefully the first meeting in May. The public hearing for both the LCAP and the budget will be the first meeting in June, and then in the final meeting in June is where we do the adoption of both the LCAP and the budget. I do want to point out that looking at the multi-year and unfortunately taking out some of the hope for savings with the preschool take back, we still do have a structural deficit, and so we are going to work towards building a budget that addresses that and present that to you in our first study session.
And I'd just like to also point out for the public that we have our community meeting on Thursday at 6 o'clock at Carpinteria High School. And part of that community meeting will be the LCAP, the Local Control Accountability Plan, and the goals as they have been wordsmithed a bit and rewritten, but they're generally the same. The order is different, so that we would love to have the public's input on the goals and the actions, which actually kind of drive our budget decisions as well. And we'll have plenty of opportunities for public input and feedback for both the budget and the LCAP at the community meeting. It will be simultaneously interpreted, snacks provided, babysitting provided, 6 o'clock at the Carp High Gym.
Great.
Cafeteria.
And I'll just conclude that the LCAP moving forward, beginning next year, must include 100% of our budget, not just that piece for supplemental and concentration. So building it in line with that LCAP is even more vital this year.
Thanks, Maureen. Okay, we need to approve this. So can I get a motion?
I move to approve. Second interim report.
Second.
Any discussion?
Again, I just continue to have some issues with with how things are happening. And
Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
nay.
Nay.
Okay. We'll move on to H3, Resolution 17-802, authorizing the borrowing of funds for the fiscal year 2017-18 and the issuance and sale of tax and revenue anticipation notes, TRANS, and participation in the California Cash Reserve Program.
I move to approve as presented.
Second?
Can we get a little more? This is just, I know, going back to the thing that you already described, which is going back to the assembly bill that was passed?
No.
Or is this totally different?
This is totally
Okay.
different. So this is something that the board has seen annually for probably many, many years. So this is a temporary tax and revenue anticipation note, which is a cash flow borrowing mechanism. Because we receive our revenues in December and April, we have periods of time where we don't have enough cash. So we temporarily borrow from this note, and then we pay it back when the tax revenues come
Like
in.
a line
And
of credit.
it's just a line of
I
credit.
remember you discussing
Yeah.
it. I remember you discussing it at an earlier meeting.
And so for the public's information, there's a 3-page background report on the online agenda describing what the TRAN is.
Okay.
So for some reason, okay. I didn't, the other attachment for some reason didn't show up. The one, yeah.
Okay.
Can I just make
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's an attachment on the
I
right-hand
know.
side. And there's
Yes.
a top one. If you click on top,
Okay,
tab,
sometimes-
that's where all the attachments are.
Okay, thank you. I'll
I
check
had
that next time.
problem.
Maybe it's a Mac thing.
All right.
I have a Mac.
Okay. This is a roll call.
Rogelio,
Aye.
Maureen,
Aye.
Michelle,
Aye.
Andy,
Aye.
and I'm aye.
Okay. H4, Resolution 17-803 of the Carpenter Board of Education, resolution approving a debt issuance and management policy in accordance with Senate Bill 1029.
I move we approve as presented.
Second?
Any discussion?
Second. No.
Again, this is going back to the, okay.
All right. Roll call.
Rogelio,
Aye.
Maureen,
Aye.
Michelle,
Aye.
Andy,
Aye.
I'm aye.
Okay. Nothing on Measure U. We'll move on to personnel. J1, release of temporary certificated personnel.
I have a comment on that.
Well, we need to have a motion first before we can comment.
Okay.
I move to approve.
Second.
Okay. Rogelio?
Okay. As a former teacher, I can see what goes through faculty, and I have always reconsidered any decisions that I have made in my life, and because I have the capacity to reconsider, and I think that that times that we are living right now, anything is possible, and I'm always trying to protect myself, my family, community, because basically this is the United States is the country of lawsuits, and right now, even if it's missing from someone, you can be sued for that. Believe me. And we have had some tough discussions regarding cuts, and I just don't see it that way.
Okay.
And so I would like to. I would like to move. I want to move to reconsider the cuts on
we-
classified budgets.
Are you, we're not talking
Regardless,
about we're not
yeah.
talking about classified budgets. We're talking about a release of temporary
Yeah,
certificated
yeah,
personnel.
correct. Yeah, but still, that I mean,
Wanna give some
layoffs
background on
or contract
Darlene,
that's
could you give us some
terminated.
background here?
Yes, so our.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, I got it. But I know. But still, the issue is there. That I would like to make that point. That I would like.
What's the point you're trying to make?
The point is that I would like to make is that I wanna move for the district to reconsider the cuts.
Okay, you can't do that right now. But we have a motion and a second to approve the release of temporary certificated personnel.
Okay.
And just, if we don't release these temporary personnel, then our actual staff can't get their job back.
Darlene, just to explain, this is discussing people who have gone on leave for whatever reason, and these are the teachers that are replacing them, basically
Correct.
like what we would call like long-term subs.
They've
Yes.
been on a temporary
Yes.
assignment for
Correct.
the school year
Yes.
because the regular employee has requested a leave of absence for the school
Okay,
year.
and so
And
we're
so they have they will be returning next year,
Mhm.
which means if we ever hire a temporary teacher, we have to release them, and they get a 1-year temporary contract.
the question I actually had, Roger, not to cut you off, did you?
No, go ahead.
Well, my question was just around the fiscal implications. Again, there is no fiscal impact, but wouldn't it be? It is more expensive to bring back the.
It depends where the temporary person came in on the salary schedule.
Right.
And then it depends where the person who is on leave, where they are. It could be a wash or.
But we would know that, right? Because we have the numbers of everybody.
Correct.
So do you have any sense of? I mean, no. If you don't know offhand, don't try to guess.
I don't know offhand, but
Okay.
I mean, it's a wash when somebody comes back from a leave of absence. It doesn't necessarily mean that they've been here for many years,
Right.
or that they're on the last column.
Mm-hmm.
This is just a kind of a normal thing we do every year.
I understand, but I just thought that the fiscal impact would be known. I just thought that would be known.
Usually we budget for the position.
Sure.
Also.
And then,
Right.
and then we may
Right,
have,
but it's usually like subs are usually a little bit less
Less.
well, then
expensive
we would
now.
have probably realized savings this year
Right,
with
yeah,
the subs. So,
right. So the
but
fiscal impact
but the
would be known.
But the budget
Mhm.
would have been made with the
I'm
the
just looking at
permanent
I'm just
employee.
looking at this with the fiscal impact. It says there's no fiscal impact. It doesn't say anything as to what the numbers are, which I thought that we would know. That I'm just asking.
So when
Okay,
we
so-
hire somebody
because-
on a temporary contract,
Mhm.
they are placed on the existing salary schedule. So when somebody is returning from their leave of absence, they
Mhm.
come back to where they were. That's why there's no fiscal impact noted here, because it just depends where everybody is.
Doesn't it also mean that there's no fiscal impact this year in this current budget, because we've already budgeted, but when you build your budget for next year, you will base it
They
on
will
those
include it.
returning staff and what they're at, right?
Yeah, and you also have to factor in that there are many circumstances where we have somebody on leave, fully paid through sick leave and extended leave, and we're paying for the sub. So it kind of washes itself out
Right.
over the course of the time.
Right.
Okay, so any further discussion?
Roger, I think I hear what you're saying in the sense that you're concerned about staffing cuts.
Correct.
In Groundhog.
Correct.
I think for this particular matter, it's almost administrative. I do support your feeling of not wanting to cut things, but I feel like this is just sort of an HR administrative. I don't think that there's any way we can really keep these teachers on unless there's openings that they would then reapply for. That's just my understanding of how educational HR works. But so these positions aren't even really available to these people. Even if we kept them hired, they would be they would have no job.
Yeah, the temps.
Okay.
Correct.
All right. I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Item J2 is a 2017-18 contract with the Santa Barbara County Special Education Local Plan, SELPA, and CUSD. Can I get a motion to approve?
I move to approve.
I second.
Any discussion?
I just have a question. Is this the same amount we're paying this year? Or is this a new?
This year, for the 16-17 school year, we have a 0.5 FTE psych, and next year we will have a full-time psych intern.
And does this come from the general fund, or is this pulled from some other source?
General.
So we're being asked to basically double the amount that we're paying?
Yes.
This is also part of the special ed preschool take back.
So
So we have to commit now to bring that psych time back.
Okay. Any further discussion?
Was there a board? There wasn't anything on this one, was there?
There's a
Was there?
background
Yeah,
page and
there's
then there's a
background
contract.
and the
I am so sorry. I am having issues tonight with the.
Look on your tabs on top.
So,
So there's a background page, as Darlene said, but I don't think her microphone was on, and there's
Okay.
a contract. And then Mrs.
Okay.
Escobedo's here if you have any questions. She's the expert on this.
Okay. I just maybe because we are increasing the services. Maybe I'm sorry to make you repeat yourself if it already
okay.
says it, but
No, that's fine.
do you feel that we need twice as much time with
Yes,
someone next
and
year?
Just a little bit of information about the psych intern position. It's someone who's working on a doctoral level program at UCSB. They have already had experience working in a school setting, so they come to us in a lot of ways fully prepared to step into a psychologist role, but they are the cost to get the service is less expensive than it would be hiring an additional school psychologist.
Okay.
And what this year, just to give you some numbers to think about, we've done so far. Last year in 2015-16, our school psychologists district-wide did 109 assessments. That includes initials, triennials, and then requested assessments. And the triennial assessment is done every 3 years. It's required by law for students with an
The
IEP.
IEP, yeah.
So far this year, we have exceeded that number by 1, and we still have 3 months left in the school year. So adding this additional psych intern time next year will help pick up some of this increasing number of assessments that we're seeing, as well as help us really start to continue to build on things that were discussed in the Barbara and Barbara report last year, like starting to expand our RTI system and be consistent across the district. Also looking at putting into place possibly some positive behavior intervention supports, because the role of the psychologist is not just counseling and assessment. It's working with general ed, being in classrooms, doing prevention, training teachers and instructional assistants on supporting students that might have behavioral needs. So this additional support will help to support that big picture district-wide.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Did we vote?
We had a motion and a second.
We did.
Is all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, item J3 is a 2017-18 contract with Kaylee L. Honeycutt, psychologist intern, per the contract with SELPA. So we're being asked to approve a contract with Ms. Honeycutt.
I move to approve.
I have a question on this.
I'll second
Oh,
that.
okay.
I'll second.
Okay. Sorry. I have a question on this. It's very good that we're hiring a psychologist, and the question I have is what's going to happen to the current therapists or psychologists that are currently on school sites? Are they going to be probably laid off next year, or reduce, or basically we are in need of psychology or of more psychologists?
Do you want me to?
So this is additional support.
Okay,
that
that's very good. That's the question that I had.
We're not reducing any
No,
of our
that's good.
current
No,
sites.
yeah, I understand that. That's why I thought I had
That's
two
a good
thoughts.
que- that's a
One,
good question,
probably,
yes.
well, there's probably next year or 2 years, some therapists or psychologists or current ones are going to be gone. But at the same time, I also thought that we needed more help regarding mental health, and that's very good. That's very good.
So we
Thank
currently
you.
have 2.3 FTE school psychologists serving all of our schools this year, plus a 0.5 intern. What we're proposing is to expand that 0.5 intern position to a 1.0 for next year.
And are
That's pretty
these what percentage of the students using the services have an IEP, an individualized educational
That's a
plan?
good question. Right now in Carpinteria, I believe our percentage is about between 10 and 12%
10 and
of our
12%.
overall student population has an IEP. And that's, as you may know, that the term IEP is very, very broad.
Right.
So
Yeah.
students have very, very different needs.
Absolutely.
We also have some specialized programs in the district that require additional support from a school psychologist, like our Therapeutic Learning Center program at Aliso, which is really our last stop for students prior to them being placed in a non-public school. So that requires a little bit more time and oversight and support from a school psychologist, and because of the behavioral needs there. We also have our SDC programs at Catalina, where often the children may have additional behavioral needs, and so that the psychologist there requires additional assessment time, additional time supporting teachers with goals, and in the general ed classroom as well.
I'm just wondering if that 10 to 12% could be allocated, could be pulled from special education funding sources, perhaps to help cover, because we are in this kind of extreme situation right now.
So special ed is 95% funded by general fund dollars.
Mm-hmm.
It already encroaches
Right,
into our
that's that
general
whole
fund.
problem.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
just trying to get creative.
And then just to add to that, the school psychologists, they don't just work with special ed students. They
Absolutely.
support
Oh,
the
absolutely.
rest of
Yeah,
our-
I just was trying to see if there was like some
Understood. Yeah.
funding
Yeah.
magic that could happen there.
Yes.
Okay, great. We have a motion and a second to approve this contract with Ms. Honeycutt. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Item J4 is a 2018-19 contract with SELPA. Basically the same thing we just approved. Can I get a motion there?
I move to approve.
Second?
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Okay, board communications. Rogelio.
Oh, yes, basically my point that I just don't think that we should lay off as many classified employees as the district is planning. And the way I see it is that that it's just that we didn't get enough notice, and that's just like I said, it's the United States. Unfortunately, it's a country with it's a country of laws, and since last August, September, I have always thought, and I always commented on the board, we have to protect the district. Protection, and that's why I'm saying that I'm supporting the teachers, and I would like the district to reconsider that classified cuts. Thank you.
Thank you. Jacqueline.
Yes. I would like to thank all the teachers and the principals for opening up the classroom and the schools for our board tour. When did we do this? Last
Monday.
week?
Monday.
It was so wonderful to see all the students, and lots of stuff are happening at the district leadership level. We're down a superintendent Up until last week, we're down a principal, and we rely on you, our leadership team, to get things moving along. And last week was such great evidence of that happening, that whatever we're dealing with in terms of this transition and our budget issues, that you have managed to keep the business side of CUSD moving along so that our teachers and our administrators at the site can continue to educate our kids and take care of our kids and make them feel safe and just promote learning. And I thank you so much for that. I've done it with flowers. I'm going to do it publicly. I thank you, our leadership team, for making that possible so that our teachers and administrators can focus on our kids. Thank you.
I do have something.
All right.
So I echo what Jacqueline said. The board tours were really great. I always love going to see and being reminded of why we sit up here, right? Why we put ourselves through this. But, and again, thank you. You guys have been just the student professionalism models, so thank you very much. But I did want to kind of shift gears a little bit, and I did write a statement just because it's an emotional thing for me. So this past week has been hard on Carpinteria, as we have been hit with devastating losses. Grief is not easy, and part of that process is to search for meaning and want answers. But in the end, the loss is real and permanent, and each person must find their own way to reconcile. I would like to take a moment to honor Betty Von Sanchez, who is a beloved early childhood teacher and community member that we lost this last week as well. Betty spent over 35 years helping to raise the children of Carpinteria through her work at the Head Start program. I personally was lucky enough to know her through our work in designing the Carpinteria Children's Project, where the Head Start is currently housed. In my rough calculation, Betty has touched the lives of over 2,000 children who passed through her preschool doors and have gone on to our schools. And for those who didn't know her as an educator, maybe you were touched by her while in line at Albertsons, where she worked for many years in the evenings and on weekends. Betty will be remembered by me by her warm smile, her very, very fierce dedication to children and families, and her never-ending desire to advocate and make this world a better place. She is loved by many and will be missed in our community. So.
Thanks, Michelle.
And I just want to close my participation in tonight's meeting with, again, bringing it back to Feely, the high school student. It's 8 p.m. here, unless the clocks haven't, 8 p.m. here in the boardroom. And the candlelight vigil, I'm sure, knowing Carpinteria, is still probably going strong. So our thoughts just go out. As a board, we can't be in two places at once. I know that all of us probably would have been at that candlelight vigil tonight if we could have. And also many of our staff members, teachers, our school community is there and grieving. And we just send our deepest, deepest thoughts to that family right now.
Thanks, Maureen. I'd like to thank the middle school 7th grade team for a wonderful field trip last week to the LA Zoo. They did an outstanding job. The kids had a great time, and we had a great group of parents along as well, and it was quite fun to see all the kids running around the zoo all day.
Entire 7th grade?
Entire 7th grade.
How many seats?
4 buses worth of 7th graders. So it was a lot of fun. And then I'd also like to a slight surprise announcement. The next Thursday, the CHS softball team will be getting a welcome surprise. So hopefully we'll have some kind of I don't know, celebration. But it's well deserved, and I was notified this morning that their new batting cage will be arriving. It's an inflatable batting cage provided by In Motion Sports, which is owned by a former Carpenter High School graduate, Craig Bilderback. And it's an inflatable batting cage, and it's going to be the first one in, I think, in Southern California. So it's quite outstanding. And he sent me pictures this morning, and it's spectacular. So Carpenter is going to be making its mark. So with that, I think we are adjourned.
Oh, future agenda items.
Oh, that's right. We wanted to add
Baylord property.
Baylord property.
And
I have two other possibles.
special ed preschool.
Oh yeah, special ed preschool.
Okay.
Two other things, which maybe should be one, but I'd like to look at sibling policy / lottery practices, which are now embedded in the interdistrict transfer. Maybe just pull those out and create an agenda item for those as they relate to all district programs.
Yeah, let's put it down on future agenda items. Just be cognizant that I've had an issue on there for about 2.5 years. So.
I understand.
Yeah.
So we may not get to it this year.
We could probably take Measure U update off of future agenda because that's a
Yeah, we get
standing
that, yeah.
agenda item.
Yeah.
Anything else?
So you're going to get
That's mine, yeah.
you're going to get a very full update from Measure U on April the 11th, correct?
And maybe American Modular Systems presentation could just be incorporated when those are starting to
So
get
that's
installed.
coming.
That's
at-
coming.
Oh, it's coming in?
April 11th.
Yeah.
Wait, take that one off.
What, don't we
Line
have
through
Measure
that one.
U update as a standing agenda
Yeah, we
item?
do.
Yeah, so you don't have to.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll take
So
those
that's
off.
two more. See, two down.
Mine's still at the top of the list.
It's been there
And it
since
keeps
I've
getting-
been on the board
Exactly.
too. Yeah.
Why don't you just do a presentation and call it?
It's really.
Are we done now?
hard, I
We're done.
think.
Yeah.
Oh, do we
Alright.
have any board calendaring, or we?
Thursday.
No, I think we're good.
We're good. Okay.
Yeah. So
The
if
Thursday?
anybody's still listening, the community meeting is Thursday at 6, correct? At the high school
high school.
auditorium. Right. Thank
Board
you.
President, I don't
Yes.
know if you want to remind the public that there is not a board meeting on the 28th.
Oh, that's right. So
28th.
we had we canceled the meeting on March 28th because it falls during spring break and many of us will not be in town. Thank you.